The heat gripped the dirt like it wanted to burn away every trace of the past. At the Hollowridge racetrack, the dust never settled. It lived in the bones of the land, in the folds of worn hats, and in the tired eyes of those who had watched these races for decades. The crowd murmured, restless. But then came silence, heavy and complete, as a boy emerged through the shimmering haze at the far end of the track. Talon Wrathborne walked barefoot, his skin smudged with ash and sweat, his tangled dark hair clinging to his forehead. But it was his eyes, cold, stormy blue, that locked everyone in place. He moved without hesitation, heading straight for the most feared horse in the state, Ironhoof, a towering black thoroughbred, known as much for his uncontrollable fury as his unbeaten speed. At his side stood Bishop Nightthorn, regional champion, a man of sharp silence and a legacy built on dominance. "Get that kid off the track," someone barked from the sidelines. But no one moved. It was as if every soul there instinctively knew they were about to witness something that couldn't be explained. Talon stopped in front of Ironhoof. The horse snorted violently, nostrils flaring, hooves twitching. But the boy didn't flinch. He raised a dirt-covered hand and placed it gently on the horse's chest. And just like that, the storm stopped. Ironhoof froze. His massive muscles softened. His breathing slowed. The fire in his eyes faded into something else, something calmer, something remembered. Bishop stepped forward, jaw clenched. "You think you know this horse, boy?" Talon didn't look at him. His voice came low, steady, like it had weight behind it. "Your horse runs because he's afraid. With me, he'll run because he's loved." The crowd went dead still. The words didn't sound like arrogance, they sounded like truth. Bishop's lips tightened, but he had no reply. "And Ironhoof?" The great beast leaned in, brushing his massive head against the boy's shoulder like an old companion, as if he'd finally found something he'd lost long ago. Talon turned and walked away, leaving only the echo of hoofbeats and dust in his wake. Before stepping through the gate, he glanced back once, just once. Ironhoof let out a single, low whinny, a sound full of memory and promise. Bishop Nightthorn stood frozen, staring at a boy he'd never seen before, but already feared. He knew, somehow, that the boy would return. And when he did, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the incident, Hollowridge was buzzing. Word spread like wildfire, the barefoot boy who tamed Ironhoof. Some dismissed it as gossip, others claimed they saw it with their own eyes. But one thing was certain, Bishop Nightthorn hadn't said a word since it happened. He'd kept to the barn, brooding, tending to Ironhoof himself. The horse, once violent and unpredictable, now stood calm in his stall, as if something had been unlocked within him. In the corner of the stable yard, Talon sat alone, crouched under the wooden beams of an old shed, picking at a crust of bread someone had tossed his way. He didn't seem hungry. His eyes scanned the fields beyond the track, distant and haunted. He'd spent the night outside, beneath the stars, with only the wind and the distant snort of horses to keep him company. No one knew where he came from. No one dared ask. That's when Mary Nightthorn appeared, Bishop's older sister and co-owner of the stables. Her eyes were sharp, but not unkind. She didn't speak at first. She just watched him. There was something unsettling about the boy's stillness, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. Finally, she approached, crouched beside him, and handed him a fresh apple. "You've got a way with horses," she said softly. "But people around here don't like what they can't explain." Talon took the apple without a word. He didn't smile, didn't thank her. He just nodded. Mary didn't press. But in her gut, something stirred, something that reminded her of old wounds and names she hadn't heard in years. That night, she dug through dusty storage boxes in the back office, searching for something she wasn't sure she'd find, until she came across a newspaper clipping nearly a decade old. A fire. A boy. A horse with a scorched flank. The last name, Wrathborne. Meanwhile, Bishop stood in Ironhoof's stall, staring into the horse's calm eyes. The animal no longer snapped or jerked away from touch. He lowered his head and nudged Bishop gently, something he'd never done before. The moment made Bishop uneasy, not because the horse was calm, but because it hadn't been him who brought that calm. The boy had done what Bishop never could. And now the crowd whispered about it like a prophecy. Late that evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Talon walked slowly through the empty stalls. A low wind moved through the slats in the walls, and somewhere behind him, he heard a voice. Not a real one. A memory. A man's voice, deep and cold. A horse knows the truth, even when people lie. Talon stopped in his tracks. His jaw clenched. The past wasn't just catching up with him, it was already here. By midday, the racetrack had returned to its usual rhythm, horses being exercised, stable hands shouting over the hum of machinery, and the sun scorching the tin roofs of the barns. But beneath that ordinary surface, something had shifted. Bishop Nightthorn watched from the shadows, leaning against a support beam with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on Talon. The boy was brushing down Ironhoof, slow and methodical, as if the horse were made of glass and memories. Every movement of his hand seemed natural, almost too natural. It gnawed at Bishop. 4 years, he'd been the one to break in the wild ones, to tame the beasts no one else dared approach. But Ironhoof had never responded to him like that, not once. It wasn't just skill, it was something deeper, something instinctual. It reminded Bishop of stories he'd heard as a child, about old horsemen with bloodlines tied to the land, men who spoke to horses without words. Myths, legends, nonsense, or so he thought. Behind the main barn, Mary quietly approached Talon again. This time, she brought an old photo, faded and creased, edges curled by time. It showed a man with cold eyes standing beside a tall black horse with a crooked blaze. The man's hand gripped the bridle with pride. "Is this your father?" she asked gently. Talon didn't look at the photo. He didn't need to. His jaw tightened, and his hand on Ironhoof stopped for just a breath. "I don't talk about him," he said, eyes fixed on the ground. "You should," Mary replied. "People are already talking for you." Word was spreading fast in town. That the Wrathborne name had returned. That Talon was the son of the infamous Cale Dreadspire Wrathborne, once a horsebreaker, later accused of cruelty and driven out after a fire that claimed 3 lives. Some said Cale died in the woods. Others swore he just vanished. But now his boy was here, and the weight of that bloodline was heavy. Bishop overheard part of the conversation. That name, Wrathborne, triggered a deep, burning memory. He remembered being a boy, watching from the fence as Cale Wrathborne screamed at his horses like they were demons, yanking reins until mouths bled. And one night he remembered smoke, flames, screams, and a child's cry, faint but unforgettable. His fists clenched. That evening, as the sky turned purple and cicadas screamed in the tall grass, Bishop confronted Talon by the water trough. "You think you're better than the rest of us?" he growled. "You've got your daddy's blood. That doesn't make you special. That makes you dangerous." Talon didn't flinch. He simply looked at him, calm and defiant. "I'm not him," he said. "But maybe I came back to finish what he started." The days that followed were heavier than the heat itself. Whispers traveled faster than horses at full gallop, and Talon Wrathborne's name was now being spoken with both awe and fear. Stable hands began stepping back when he passed. Some believed he had a gift. Others feared a curse. But through it all, Talon stayed quiet, spending long hours with Ironhoof, sleeping in the hay, and rising before dawn as if pulled by some invisible rhythm. Ironhoof had changed too. The once aggressive stallion now moved with a sense of calm purpose, but only when Talon was near. With others, he remained wild and tense. The connection between boy and beast deepened by the hour. But it wasn't just gentleness, it was precision. Talon didn't just calm Ironhoof. He understood him, anticipated him. It was as though the two shared a secret language written in breath and muscle. One morning, Mary found Talon in the round pen at sunrise. No saddle, no reins, just the boy and the horse, circling each other in silence. Ironhoof moved like a shadow around him, matching his pace, his head low, eyes locked on Talon's. "He's not just responding to you," Mary murmured to herself from the fence. "He's following you." That frightened her more than she expected, because she remembered who else had ridden without reins, Talon Wrathborne. Later that day, Tom Grady, the old trainer who had worked with Cale years ago, arrived at the stables unannounced. His limp was worse now, his face carved by time. He hadn't been seen in Hollowridge in almost a decade. "I heard Cale's boy's back," he said to Mary. "And if that horse is listening to him, you better start thinking real hard about what that means." Mary asked if he'd come to help. Tom shook his head. "I came to see if I was looking at a miracle or a mistake repeating itself." Meanwhile, Bishop couldn't sleep. His dreams were turning violent again. Burning barns, a horse screaming, a man with blood on his hands. He'd spent years burying those images, blaming Cale for all of it. Now the boy was dragging it back into the light. That night, in the darkness of the tack room, Bishop reached for an old envelope buried beneath years of papers. Inside, a single photo, Cale holding a newborn child, eyes hollow with regret. At the edge of the field, Talon stood beside Ironhoof, staring out over the open track. "You remember him, don't you?" he whispered to the horse. Ironhoof snorted softly, pawing the earth. In that moment, Talon felt it, not just the memory of Cale, but something older. Like the land itself was waiting for him to decide who he was going to be. Not just Wrathborne's son, but something else entirely. The Hollowridge Summer Invitational was only a week away, and tension gripped the ranch like a coiled rope. Flyers had gone up. Spectators were expected from 5 neighboring counties. It was supposed to be Bishop Nightthorn's triumphant return, a public confirmation of his dominance with Ironhoof. But now, all anyone whispered about was the boy. People wanted to see the orphan, the wild one, the Wrathborne son. And Bishop hated that more than anything. Behind closed doors, Bishop and Mary fought for the first time in years. "You're feeding it," Bishop barked. "This fantasy. This ghost of Cale you keep walking around like some kind of damn prophecy." Mary refused to back down. "I'm not feeding anything. That boy didn't ask to be born into this. He's here, and Ironhoof has chosen him, whether we like it or not." But even as she defended Talon, a part of her feared what Tom Grady had said days ago, miracle or mistake. Meanwhile, Talon stood alone in the training pen, the wind twisting through the empty bleachers. He held a worn, leather-bound journal in his hands, Cale's. Mary had found it locked away in an old tack trunk. Inside were fragments of a man slipping into madness, drawings of horses with eyes like fire, notes on training without pain, and long, rambling passages about redemption, legacy, and blood. One entry was circled over and over. "The horse doesn't carry the burden. The rider does." That night, Talon had another dream, vivid and suffocating. He was in a barn engulfed in flames. Ironhoof thrashed wildly, younger and leaner, trapped in a stall. Cale stood nearby, his face lit by firelight, screaming Talon's name, but never moving to help. Talon reached for the horse, but the flames pulled him back. He woke drenched in sweat, gasping for air, the smell of smoke clinging to his memory like a scar. The next morning, Tom Grady approached Talon quietly, holding a small, scorched horseshoe. This was Ironhoof's, when he was just a colt, Tom said. "He survived that fire." "Barely." "Same one that took your mama." Talon didn't speak. He just stared at the blackened metal in his palm. The truth was becoming unbearable. He wasn't just connected to the horse. They were survivors of the same night, bound by heat and loss. And as the sun sank behind the hills, the list of riders for the invitational was posted. At the very bottom, scribbled in uncertain handwriting, was a name that wasn't supposed to be there. Talon Wrathborne, riding Ironhoof. Someone had signed him up. And as he looked across the ranch, Bishop stared back at him with eyes full of fury. War had been declared. The morning of the qualifying heat arrived with a heavy sky. Clouds hung low, threatening rain, and the wind felt colder than it should have in late summer. In the paddock, riders tightened saddles, whispered strategies, and exchanged hollow smiles. But the center of gravity had shifted. Everyone felt it. All eyes kept drifting toward the far stall, where Talon Wrathborne stood alone with Ironhoof, his hand resting gently on the horse's flank, his jaw locked in silence. Bishop paced across the arena, burning with resentment. He had trained for years, sacrificed everything to master this track, and now, some barefoot stable brat with a broken past had become the headline. Worse, the horse Bishop had poured his soul into now moved with someone else's rhythm. Mary had tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't hear it. "You don't win races with sob stories," he'd snapped. "You win with control. And I'm not about to lose everything to some kid chasing ghosts." In the small room above the stables, Tom Grady watched the track through an old pair of binoculars. He had seen this before. Different names, different faces, but the same war. The battle between fear and instinct. Between cruelty and trust. He murmured, half to himself, half to the wind, "Wrathborne blood burns hot." But sometimes it burns through the saddle. Then he turned away from the window and opened the folded sheet of paper on his lap. It was Cale's death certificate, or rather, the one that was never filed. As Talon mounted Ironhoof, the world narrowed. The noise of the crowd faded, replaced by the beat of the horse's heart beneath him. He wasn't ready. Not really. But something in him had shifted, something between the fire of the past and the calm he found in Ironhoof's breath. The horse moved with a grace Talon didn't command, but trusted. As the gates creaked open, the wind picked up, and the silence was broken only by the steady clop of hooves against dirt. Bishop approached before the start. His voice was low, venomous. "He's still my horse," he said. "You're just keeping my saddle warm until he remembers who made him." Talon didn't respond. He just looked him in the eyes, calm but sharp. "Maybe that's the problem. You made him. I just listened to him." Bishop's fist clenched, but the starter's whistle ended the moment. As Talon took his place at the starting line, Ironhoof's ears flicked back. The gate official gave the signal. The metal barriers locked. In that frozen second, Talon whispered under his breath, "We don't run for them. We run for her." The gate flew open, hooves thundered, and the past began to chase them both down the track. The gates burst open like a shotgun blast, and 10 horses exploded onto the track. Ironhoof hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough to put them 2 lengths behind. Dirt flew into Talon's face, grit stung his eyes, and the roar of the crowd became a wall of chaos behind him. But he didn't panic. He closed his eyes for half a breath, placed a hand gently on Ironhoof's neck, and whispered, "She's watching." The horse surged forward like a fuse had been lit in his chest. Bishop had the lead. He leaned into his mount with trained precision, his posture perfect, every movement calculated. He wasn't just racing to win. He was racing to prove that control beat instinct, that legacy meant nothing without discipline. But as they rounded the first bend, he heard it, Ironhoof's hooves pounding harder, closer, like war drums getting louder. Bishop glanced back, and for the first time in years, he felt it, doubt. Talon didn't ride the way the others did. There was no stiffness, no strain. He flowed with Ironhoof, like water over rock. He wasn't pushing the horse, he was allowing the horse to be. With every stride, Talon felt closer to something. Someone. His mother's face flashed in his mind, then her voice, calm and broken, from his last memory of her, "He'll never break you if you remember who you are." And now, on this track, with thousands watching, he felt her spirit rise like wind behind him. The final turn came fast. Bishop veered in slightly, enough to make Ironhoof shift wide. It wasn't illegal, but it was dirty. Talon's shoulder nearly hit the rail. The crowd gasped. Ironhoof stumbled, just briefly, but Talon didn't lose balance. He leaned forward, whispered again, this time more firmly, "Not like him. You don't need to run in fear anymore." And Ironhoof responded, not with rage, but with power. They came up side by side in the last 100 meters. The noise was deafening now. Bishop glanced again, and what he saw unnerved him. Not a boy desperate to win, but a boy free. Talon wasn't racing for the crowd or the trophy. He was racing for memory, for healing, for something only he and the horse could name. And Bishop, for the first time, felt like the outsider. At the finish line, hooves struck dirt in perfect sync. From the stands, it looked like a dead heat. The announcer's voice cracked as he called it too close to tell. Officials rushed to review the footage. But in that moment, as Ironhoof slowed, Talon smiled, not because he had won, but because for the first time in his life he hadn't run away. He had run through. The crowd held its breath as the officials reviewed the photo finish. On the screen above the stands, the image froze. Two horses, neck and neck, muscles straining, dust suspended midair. The silence that followed was louder than any cheer. Finally, the announcer's voice cracked through the speakers. "Winner, by a nose. Talon Wrathborne, riding Ironhoof." Cheers erupted. People jumped to their feet. But Talon didn't react. He sat still in the saddle, Ironhoof beneath him, both of them heaving, covered in sweat and dirt. For a moment, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like closure. Like a page had been turned in a book he hadn't written, but had been forced to live inside for too long. Bishop was still at the finish line, motionless. His mouth tight. His eyes burning. Mary approached quietly, placing a gentle hand on Ironhoof's neck. "You did it," she whispered. Talon slid off the saddle, his legs trembling beneath him. "We did it," he replied, eyes still locked on Bishop. The two of them hadn't exchanged a word since the race ended, but they would. The air between them was thick with something unfinished. Later that evening, in the quiet of the stable, Tom Grady stepped forward holding a folded document. His hand trembled slightly as he passed it to Talon. "Your father," Tom said, "wasn't just feared because of how he treated horses. He was feared because he carried secrets, ones that almost no one was allowed to know." Talon unfolded the paper. It was a letter, written by Cale Dreadspire Wrathborne, months before the fire. Addressed to Bishop Nightthorn. Talon read it in silence. The words were hard. Raw. Confessional. Cale had admitted to pushing his horses too far, to fearing his own rage. But the final lines burned deepest. "I see it in you, Bishop. That same fire. The difference is, you still have time to choose what to do with it." Bishop stood in the barn doorway, watching Talon read. "I got that letter the night before the fire," he said, voice low. "And I never opened it until today." His eyes were tired. Not defeated, but cracked open. "I hated your father. I thought he ruined everything. But now I see, maybe he was trying to stop it from happening again. Through you." Talon folded the letter slowly. "He didn't save the people he should have," he said. "But maybe he was trying to save us." The silence that followed wasn't bitter. It was honest, heavy. And for the first time since Talon had arrived in Hollowridge, he and Bishop weren't enemies on a track. They were two sons of fire, finally seeing the flames for what they were. The days following the race passed in slow motion. Hollowridge felt quieter now, not because there were fewer people, but because something heavy had lifted. Talon no longer walked like a ghost. He still kept to himself, still moved with that quiet awareness, but there was a new steadiness in his step. Ironhoof, too, seemed changed, more present, more grounded. Like they'd both crossed through something dark and made it to the other side. Mary began including Talon in the daily routines, not just as a helper, but as someone whose voice mattered. He spoke little, but when he did, people listened. Even the skeptical stable hands who once avoided him now nodded with respect. It wasn't about the race anymore. It was about what everyone had seen in it, a boy carrying more than his own weight, and letting it go stride by stride. Bishop, on the other hand, spent most of his time at the edge of the property, fixing the old fence line by hand. He didn't talk much, but he watched. Sometimes he'd stand near the paddock, arms crossed, staring at Talon and Ironhoof with a mix of regret and something harder to name. One afternoon, he approached Talon while the boy was oiling a saddle. "I used to think control was the same as strength," Bishop said. "Turns out I was just scared of letting go." Talon didn't respond right away. He set down the rag, looked Bishop in the eyes, and simply asked, "Why did you never leave?" Bishop sighed. "Because leaving would have meant I lost. But staying made me someone I didn't like." It wasn't a full apology, but it was more than Talon had expected. And for the first time, there was no challenge between them. Just understanding. That evening, Mary gathered everyone in the stable yard. The sky was streaked with gold, the kind of sunset that made you believe in second chances. She announced that Talon would be staying on permanently, not as a guest, but as a member of the Hollowridge team. The applause was small but sincere. Even Bishop nodded once. Quiet approval from a man who once refused to share the track. As the sun dipped below the hills, Talon stood alone beside Ironhoof. The horse nuzzled his shoulder gently, and Talon closed his eyes. He thought of his mother, of Cale, of fire and fear, and the boy he used to be. None of it was gone, but it no longer held him captive. For the first time in his life, Talon Wrathborne wasn't running from anything. He was exactly where he was meant to be. Autumn came early that year. The wind carried a different kind of chill now, clean, not heavy. Hollowridge had settled into a quiet rhythm. The excitement of the race had faded, but its impact lingered in the soil, in the stables, and most of all, in the people. Talon had found his place among them. He worked at dawn, laughed a little more, and slept without waking from fire-drenched dreams. He was still the same boy, but something inside had softened. One afternoon, Talon wandered to the far pasture, where the grass grew long and untouched. Ironhoof followed him freely, no lead rope, no command. The two moved in sync, silent but connected. In the distance, the fence line faded into the trees. Beyond it, the woods where Cale had once disappeared. Talon stopped by an old, half-buried stone. It was unmarked, weather-worn, a place no one talked about. He knelt beside it, pressing one hand into the earth. "I don't forgive everything," he said quietly, as if someone were listening. "But I understand more now." The wind answered like a breath through the trees. Talon placed a folded piece of paper at the base of the stone, the last page of Cale's journal. The one where he'd written only one line, "Maybe love isn't soft. Maybe it's what keeps you standing." Talon stood up slowly, no longer that lost boy in the ashes. Back at the stables, Bishop was waiting. He held a saddle in one hand and a rope in the other. "You're taking Ironhoof out again?" he asked, almost casually. Talon nodded. There was no tension between them now, only space. Bishop stepped closer. Next time, maybe I'll ride too. If he'll let me. Talon smirked, just a little. He probably won't. But you can try. That evening, Hollowridge hosted its first community ride in over a decade. Families came. Old riders returned. Laughter echoed down the dirt paths as horses trotted under string lights. Talon rode Ironhoof bareback through the middle of it all. No fear, no performance, just presence. Mary watched from the fence, tears in her eyes she didn't try to hide. Beside her, Tom Grady leaned on his cane and whispered, "That boy saved more than just a horse." As the stars emerged, Talon lay in the grass near Ironhoof, staring up into the quiet night. He thought of everything that led him here: pain, loss, anger, and something stronger beneath it all. Something that never left him, even when he thought it had. For the first time, Talon Wrathborne felt the wind stop, not because it had nowhere to go, but because he no longer needed to run.